As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbours and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know."
The passage starts with a bold statement, there's a man born blind, and then the whole thing unrolls from there. And we're all very conscious that there's a big disaster in Christchurch, and there's been a question of how we react to that.
Yeah, and it is a huge, huge question, isn't it? That people are, people are asking, what's going on? Who sinned? That's the question, isn't it? Whose fault is it?
Whose fault is it?
Where do we blame? And who's going to pick up the tab? And in all sorts of ways, not just those billions and billions of dollars that we're talking about. So what can we say to that, Raymond?
Well, the immediate human tendency is to blame somebody, and of course the big target is God, to blame God. But the Dean of Christchurch, Peter Beck, has made this marvellous statement that it's no use blaming God, that God is in the compassion and the aid that people are rushing to bring to the people of Christchurch. And I think that's where the emphasis is in this passage as well.
Yes, I remember that statement. He said something like, "The earth is doing what the earth does."
The earth is doing what the earth does.
And yes, God is in, as you said, the compassion and the reaching out to people, which is we don't really see in this passage as we read on. The actual lectionary on Sunday is much longer than the few verses that we've read. It's always interesting to me as we read this that the man who was healed, he sort of says, I don't actually know. I don't know where Jesus is. I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that I was blind and now I can see.
I can see, yes.
And that's enough.
I think that both Jesus and the blind man, who are the main actors, remain factual all the time. That Jesus can see that there's a man who's blind
and in need,
and the blind man knows that he can see before, and all the other argumentation swirls around this.
It's peripheral, isn't it?
It is peripheral to the main point. And perhaps the big point is that in a situation of disaster, like a man here who's born blind, which is a terrible thing to be born blind. The purpose of that is that God's glory can be revealed. How is God's glory revealed? In the healing.
Yes, and the community, which then may or may not accept what's happened.
That's right.
Just on the born blind and the tragedy, I do remember a year or two ago, one of our own congregation members speaking as a blind person, in fact as somebody who went blind as a very young person, telling me how she rode a bicycle. And I always wondered that, and I said, well, she said it was no problem because I could hear the wall approaching. And isn't that a wonderful way of somebody actually overcoming what certainly to me seems an utter tragedy. And Yes, so I also think, of course, of John Newton's wonderful hymn, Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace.
I was blind, but now I see. Once he understood, and I guess received the grace of God and began to move in that particular circle.
Yes, well, he was the captain of a slave ship, and he got a consignment of slaves, and he got halfway to Liverpool where they used to unload these slaves, and he suddenly realised what he was doing was wrong.
These are people.
And he turned his boat around and went back and liberated all these slaves. So suddenly his eyes were opened and he saw. Yeah. So it's not just physical seeing, it's insight and being enlightened and seeing.
This particular passage, the chapter, if we read right through the chapter, there are all these sort of ins and outs of it. Yeah. But I think it's worth just finishing by reading the last few verses from verse 37. Jesus says to the man who's now been given his sight, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. And he responds, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Yeah. And I think that's what it's all about.
It's the blind man who got the message.
He certainly did.
He was the one who could see in all these senses, and the others were blind, although they thought they could see. That's what the passage plays on all the time.
Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him.